The recent havoc wreaked by a wildfire in California has turned the once picturesque landscape into a smoky, apocalyptic scene. Nature is as unpredictable as it is powerful. It can inspire awe one moment and bring unimaginable destruction the next. Throughout history, natural disasters have struck without warning, leaving behind scars that last for generations. From earthquakes that shake the very foundations of our planet to tsunamis that swallow entire cities, here are 15 of the most shocking events in nature that will send a chill down your spine. Let's start off with number 15, the 1874 Year of the Locust. Crop-destroying locust plagues were a common nuisance on the 19th century American frontier, but none compared to the insect Armageddon that unfolded in the summer of 1874. A dry spring created perfect breeding conditions for the Rocky Mountain locust, and when they hatched, trillions of winged terrors swarmed across the Great Plains, devouring everything in sight. Eyewitnesses described the locusts arriving in clouds so dense they blocked out the sun for hours, leaving towns in eerie twilight. When they landed, they didn't just eat crops, they ate everything. Clothes, wood, and anything remotely chewable became fair game. The air is alive with them, reported the New York Times, as if describing a bad horror movie. Farmers tried to fight back with fire, gunpowder, and sheer desperation, but the bugs won every time. The devastation cost millions in crops and forced some settlers to abandon their dreams of the West. Ironically, nature eventually turned on the locusts themselves, driving them to extinction by the early 20th century. But for those who lived through 1874, it felt like the apocalypse with wings. Number 14, the AD 1138 Aleppo earthquake. On October 11, 1138, Aleppo woke up to a rude surprise. The ground had decided it was time for a vigorous workout. Sitting on the collision course of the Arabian and African plates, Aleppo was no stranger to earthquakes. But this one wasn't your average rumble. The city's iconic citadel crumbled like an overbaked cake, and houses tumbled like they were made of toothpicks. The death toll? Historians argue about the number like it's a heated debate on whose turn it is to buy coffee. One 15th century account claims 230,000 lives were lost, though they might have gotten their disasters mixed up. Georgia, we're looking at you. Regardless, it was catastrophic enough to cement itself as one of the deadliest natural disasters in history. So, what we can learn from this shocking event? Well, it's simple. When you live on tectonic plates that can't get along, always keep your valuables somewhere earthquake-proof. Or, move. Number 13, the year without a summer. It's pretty hard to imagine a year without summer, but in 1816, the world got a grim taste of it. After Indonesia's Mat Tambora erupted in 1815, it blasted so much ash into the atmosphere that the sun seemed to pack up and leave. Global temperatures dropped by 3 degrees, which doesn't sound like much until you realize it turned the weather into a chaotic mess. In India, droughts and floods tag-teamed to create the perfect conditions for a new strain of cholera, which killed millions. Europe shivered through endless rain, crop failures, and food riots, while the US had snow in June, killing off farms and finances. New Englanders, with their signature sarcasm, called it 1800 and froze to death. Not all was doom and gloom, though. Expensive horse feed led to the invention of the bicycle, and Mary Shelley, stuck indoors in rainy Switzerland, wrote Frankenstein. Turns out a little global misery can inspire genius, or at least horror. Number 12, the 1859 Carrington event. In September 1859, British astronomer Richard Carrington noticed 2 unusually bright spots within a sunspot group on the sun's surface. What he had stumbled upon was the first recorded solar flare, a cosmic hissy fit from our star that unleashed a barrage of radiation and charged particles. The resulting Carrington event became the largest solar storm in recorded history, and Earth was its unfortunate target. Auroras lit up the night skies as far south as Hawaii, making the heavens look like they were auditioning for a rave. In Colorado, the light was so intense that people could read newspapers outdoors at midnight. But while the visuals were mesmerizing, the accompanying geomagnetic chaos wasn't. Telegraph systems around the globe went haywire. Sparks shot out of machines, igniting fires and zapping operators, while in some places, telegraphs worked without batteries because the atmosphere was so electrified. Scientists warn that if a Carrington-scale event hit today, it would fry satellites, collapse power grids, and cost trillions. In short, it would leave us all staring at the sky, but not in awe, just despair. Number 11. The 1900 Great Galveston Storm. On September 8, 1900, a hurricane roared through Galveston, Texas, with winds so fierce they seemed determined to wipe the city off the map, and they nearly succeeded. Galveston, a thriving port city, was utterly unprepared for the 140-mile-per-hour onslaught. By the time the storm passed, it had flattened 3,600 houses, crushed 600 businesses, and turned 1,900 acres into a wasteland of rubble and despair. The human toll was staggering. Estimates of the death count range between 6,000 and 8,000, roughly 1/6 of the island's population. Survivors described waves swallowing entire neighborhoods and winds shredding structures like tissue paper. With no seawall in place, the ocean surged over the island, leaving destruction and death in its wake. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. In the aftermath, Galveston built a seawall and raised its buildings in a desperate attempt to protect what was left, but the city never fully recovered its former glory. Number 10. The Dust Veil of 536 A.D. In the mid-6th century, a mysterious cloud of dust blanketed much of the world, dimming the sun and causing temperatures to plummet. The most dread portent took place, wrote Byzantine historian Procopius. The sun gave forth its light without brightness. It was less a winter wonderland and more an apocalyptic nightmare. Crops withered in the cold, triggering famine that spanned continents. Droughts and starvation became a way of life, and to make matters worse, the bubonic plague decided this was the perfect time to make its European debut. It wasn't a great century to be alive. The source of this dust veil remains debated. Some blame volcanic eruptions, with ice cores revealing heavy sulfate deposits that suggest a massive blast, perhaps in El Salvador. Others suggest a comet or asteroid collision. Either way, the world learned the hard way that when the sky goes dark, civilization doesn't do so well. Number 9. The Great Smog of 1952. Well, not every natural disaster comes from Mother Nature, as London learned in December 1952. A deadly cocktail of coal smoke and factory pollution brewed over the city, forming a smog so thick it made breathing a life-threatening activity. The problem? Well, a high-pressure system trapped the pollution, turning the city into a giant, sooty gas chamber for 4 long days. Visibility dropped to near zero, forcing Londoners to stumble through the streets. Livestock suffocated in their fields, and thousands of people, mostly kids and the elderly, developed severe respiratory issues. Before it lifted, the smog had killed 4,000 people, with thousands more succumbing to its effects in the weeks that followed. The catastrophe spurred the British government into action, leading to the Clean Air Act of 1956, which banned black coal smoke in urban areas and offered subsidies for cleaner fuels. While nature is pretty innocent in this event, it's a reminder that humans can cause just as much damage as natural disasters. Hope China's sun won't burn the entire world. Number 8. The Tunguska Event. On June 30, 1908 at 7 a.m., A blazing light tore across the Siberian sky and exploded with the force of 5 to 10 megatons of TNT, hundreds of times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The resulting shockwave flattened 500,000 acres of forest and knocked people off their feet 40 miles away. Miraculously, no human fatalities were reported. The explosion, known as the Tunguska event, sent shockwaves across the globe. Seismic devices as far away as England picked up the impact, and nights in Asia were so bright that people could read newspapers outdoors. Despite the devastation, the cause remained a mystery for decades. When a Russian expedition finally reached the remote site in 1927, they found no crater. Most scientists agree it was likely a meteor or icy comet that exploded mid-air, leaving no significant debris. But to this day, Tunguska remains one of nature's most enigmatic fireworks shows. Number 7. The 1970 Huascaran Avalanche. On May 31, 1970, Mount Huascaran, Peru's tallest mountain, decided it was tired of standing still and unleashed one of the deadliest landslides in history. Triggered by a 7.9 magnitude earthquake, the mountain's ice and rocks turned into a speeding death train, hurtling down at an unbelievable 100 miles per hour. If you think that's fast, try outrunning a boulder the size of a small office building. It won't end well. The avalanche obliterated everything in its path, including the towns of Yungay and Ranrahirca. Over 70,000 people perished in what became one of the most tragic days in Peru's history. Imagine a wall of ice, rock, and sheer terror descending on you. That's not a snow day. That's nature's idea of extreme redecorating. The moral of the story? Mountains may be majestic, but don't get too comfortable living next to one. Number 6. 1839 Coringa Cyclone. In 1839, Coringa, a bustling port city on India's Andhra Pradesh coast, was a thriving hub of trade and culture. And then, on November 25th, nature decided it had other plans. A cyclone rolled in with a 40-foot storm surge that turned the city into a giant water park, minus the fun. The death toll? A jaw-dropping 300,000 people. That's the population of a small country wiped out in a single night. Coringa was never the same again. It went from a bustling port to a ghost town faster than you can say climate disaster. Fun fact, the term cyclone was coined after this very event by a British official who probably needed a name for the sheer level of destruction he'd witnessed. It was a reminder that even in places where tropical storms are commonplace, nature can still surprise us with its fury. And if you're ever in India and hear the word cyclone, run for cover. Number 5. The 1920 Haiyuan earthquake. On December 16, 1920, China found itself in the crosshairs of one of the most powerful quakes ever recorded. Haiyuan County bore the brunt of the 7.8 magnitude quake, or 8.5, depending on whose numbers you trust, and the destruction spread across neighboring provinces. To make matters worse, the region's loess soils, a fancy term for unstable dirt, triggered massive landslides, claiming over 30,000 lives. The total death toll ranged between 200,000 and 273,400, depending on whether you believe the U.S. Geological Survey or Chinese seismologists. Either way, it was bad. Parts of the Great Wall even collapsed, proving that not even one of the world's most famous fortifications could withstand Mother Nature's tantrums. Number 4. Bola Cyclone, 1970. In November 1970, the Bola cyclone hit Bangladesh, then East Pakistan, like a freight train made of water. With wind speeds reaching 205 km/h, it holds the grim title of the world's deadliest tropical cyclone. And if the winds weren't bad enough, the storm surge rolled in like a liquid bulldozer, wiping out entire villages and drowning an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 people. Seasonal workers harvesting rice were caught in the chaos, making the death toll even harder to pin down. The devastation was so widespread that it caused political upheaval, setting the stage for Bangladesh's independence movement. If this cyclone taught us anything, it's that the ocean doesn't care about your plans, your crops, or your infrastructure. It's a force of nature, and when it wants to flex, there's not much we can do except hold on tight and hope for the best. Number 3. The West Africa Ebola outbreak. The West Africa Ebola outbreak was what nightmares are made of, the kind where you wake up clutching hand sanitizer. It started in Guinea, spread to Sierra Leone and Liberia, and left urban centers in absolute chaos. Over 2 years, the virus claimed more than 11,000 lives, wiping out 40% of those it infected. Ebola didn't discriminate. It was an equal opportunity horror show. The international community freaked out. Even developed countries, usually smug behind their borders, saw cases popping up in Europe and the US, sparking mass panic. Nations scrambled to help, but mostly to protect themselves. On the bright side, if you can call it that, the outbreak spurred vaccine and treatment research, which is now being used against newer outbreaks. Number 2. Severo-Kurilsk earthquake. In 1952, the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia decided it was time for a geological performance. A megathrust earthquake, basically the heavyweight champion of earthquakes, hit the region, where the Pacific Plate and North American Plate awkwardly meet. The result? A tsunami with waves up to 50 feet tall crashed into the Kuril Islands and Kamchatka like a vengeful Poseidon. The sparsely populated region wasn't spared. Between 10,000 and 15,000 people lost their lives, and entire towns were erased as if nature hit the undo button. But the shockwaves didn't stop there. The tsunami had the audacity to make an appearance in Japan, Hawaii, Alaska, Chile, and even New Zealand. Moral of the story? Living near tectonic plate boundaries is like sitting next to an unpredictable, tantrum-prone child. One wrong move, and it's game over. Number 1. The Black Death. From 1346 to 1353, the Black Death was busy, proving that sometimes the smallest creatures can cause the biggest problems. This outbreak of the bubonic plague, carried by fleas hitching rides on rats, killed an estimated 200 million people across Europe, Africa, and Asia. The rats didn't care about borders or social status. They were equal opportunity disease couriers, and their fleas were the grim reapers of the 14th century. Ports, being the bustling hubs they were, became hotbeds for the plague, with the bacterium spreading like gossip at a medieval feast. Towns turned into ghost stories overnight, and plague doctors with bird-like masks became history's creepiest healthcare workers. The takeaway? Sometimes, it's not the dragons or wars that get you. It's the tiny, flea-covered rats stowing away on your trade ships. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.